So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 2021 Friends of the Cabildo member lecture series. So I see a lot of names on here that I recognize as members, and some of you that are the first time. So if this is your first time, I hope you have you learn a lot and you come back. We have our second lecture will be on February 23rd, I believe it is, on the Aaron Burr conspiracy. And then we're going to probably have about 6 or 7 of these. Um, I say through the spring. It doesn't seem like we're in spring yet, but we're getting there. So we're going to have a couple more of the, like I said, 6 or 7 more of these, all on different topics, all New Orleans related, all pretty much all going to be speakers that are members of the Friends of the Cabildo or affiliated with us somehow over the years. And tonight we're going to be talking about Earl Palmer. Our speaker tonight is Dave Thomas. Dave is a local tour guide. He is a drummer as well, and has presented for our Second Thursday lecture series, symposiums, our symposium last month and multiple times over the years. So I'm very thankful for Dave because he reached out to me and said he wanted to do a little bit of research on Earl Palmer. I'm guessing as a drummer, that was his want, and so I immediately I know of Earl Palmer, but I don't know everything I need to know about Earl Palmer, and I think we're going to learn a lot tonight. So with that, I will leave this to Dave. Like I said, if this is your first time, we're going to have more coming out. We'll have one in about a month. So, and maybe some more, maybe one in between there. So I hope you enjoy. And Dave, thank you so much for doing this tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. So audio sounds good. You can hear me?
Audio sounds good. Yep.
Awesome. So I did not plan to start the presentation with this slide, but there was a NOLA.com article today. Ian McNulty said Matas's grocery store is closing in the French Quarter. And that really struck me because it has some relationship to Earl, because of course he started his recording career, J&M Studio on Rampart Street, that was run by Cosmo Matassa, and this is his family's grocery store. So we're losing it after almost 100 years. We're here to talk about this guy, Earl Palmer. As Jason said, I'm a drummer and a tour guide, and I have been over time more interested in Earl Palmer, some as a drummer, but really probably more actually as a tour guide, because I tend to specialize in music tours. And the more I learned about Earl Palmer and what he touched on, I realized this guy is really, really significant. His influence goes way beyond his instrument and way beyond the city of New Orleans. He was a drummer that was born and really started his career here in New Orleans. Jason and I have been kind of talking about doing a presentation on him kind of casually, but didn't have any sense of urgency. But I know there's a lot of energy now with the street renaming activity, maybe using Earl Palmer to rebrand Palmer Avenue and/or Palmer Park. So that kind of accelerated our timing on that. And I'm really not going to talk about street renaming, or I don't have any plan to, other than just to let people know that was sort of lent some urgency to this discussion. I think his most impactful influence is summed up by this quote from Robert Palmer from 1990. He's a music historian. And I want to emphasize, he said, if any single musician, not single drummer, but single musician can be credited with defining rock and roll as a rhythmic idiom distinct from the jump R&B and all else that preceded it, that musician is surely Earl Palmer. So he's a big deal for a lot of reasons, and I hope that's what I'm going to convey with the rest of this presentation. His legacy, I think, has 4 pieces to it. One is that he influenced rock and roll drumming to help define how the rhythm of all rock and roll has been played since the 1960s. There was a major shift through the 50s and into the early 60s of the rhythm of essentially all rock and roll. And we're going to delve into that pretty deeply. And he drove a lot of that. He wasn't the only one that did it. He wasn't the only one that participated, but he really drove it, maybe more than anybody else. Here in New Orleans, he played on all these legendary early rock and roll recordings, and that includes every hit by Little Richard and all the early Fats Domino recordings. And then in 1957, he wound up out in Los Angeles as part of what was known as the Wrecking Crew, which was essentially an aggregate of session musicians that, and he personally played on dozens and dozens, I don't know, maybe hundreds of hits. And he also broke the color barrier for premium recording sessions for film and television when he was out in Los Angeles. So I'm going to do a little bit of his youth before the music, but frankly, I'm going to fly through it. To me personally, I feel like I'm giving it short shrift, but I have to because there's so much of the music that I want to cover. And so his early life, we're just going to blow through. He was born and raised in Treme, very, very rich cultural environment. In addition to that, it was rife with the usual racial tensions of Jim Crow. He was born in 1924, so he went through a lot of that. Had an absent father. Not sure how much that influenced him because he had such a good network and very, very rich cultural environment there. Early on as a kid, he started doing tap dancing professionally. He worked on Bourbon Street, worked in some local clubs, and did it a lot with his mother and his aunt, which performed as the Theophilus Sisters. And he also toured, again, with the Theophilus Sisters in solo, part of Ida Cox Darktown Scandals Review. Crossed paths with Sammy Davis Jr. That's a picture of Sammy Davis Jr. right there when he was a kid dancing with the Will Maston Trio. And he said he got a couple of significant things from his dancing career that really played into his music career later. He got an understanding for song structure, and he learned how to do improvisation. He lived half a dozen plus neighborhoods around the North Claiborne, what is now the I-10 corridor. And as you can imagine, most of his neighborhood is decimated now. The most significant residence, probably as far as his career, was at 918 North Claiborne. That's where he lived right before he went into the Army in World War II, and where he lived after he came out. And it's essentially an empty lot under an off-ramp now on I-10. The one residence that I can find with some confidence that I think he actually lived in is at 1526 St. Philip. That's it in the photo on the left, and he would have lived on the left-hand side. And these were all rental units, so his family didn't own any of these, but he basically spent his whole life in New Orleans in this localized area in Treme. So World War II winds up in service units. It was still the Jim Crow era. The Army was still segregated during that. I think of all the things that happened, the most significant thing was that he actually was at a place called Malmedy during the Battle of the Bulge. And just for a little quick World War II history, the Battle of the Bulge was the last major Nazi counterattack in World War II, and they surrounded some US troops. It was in the middle of winter, so it was awful conditions. And there were several, the battle is noted among other things for several massacres where the SS troops, after they captured US soldiers, just shot them down. And the most notorious one is actually close enough to Malmedy that it's been named for it. So that's where he was. And to me, the impact of that is that could have been Earl. So he comes back to New Orleans, and that's when he picks up drumming. After service in World War II is when he picks up drumming. So if he's born in 1924, he's not really until his young 20s before he's doing any kind of serious playing and drumming. And there are a couple of stories of what inspired him. One version is that there were a couple of the bebop flavored big bands. He also says he was inspired by hearing a local drummer by the name of Vernal Fournier and Art Blakey in the same night. And Vernal Fournier had a national reputation for playing with a guy by the name of Ahmad Jamal. Actually, he created a drum groove for that song that pretty much defines that song. When anybody plays it now, they kind of have to do that. And Art Blakey was an early bebop drummer, had a band called the Jazz Messengers for decades, and he was known for bringing up younger talent. And at one point, Wynton and Branford Marsalis were his frontline horn section in one of his versions of the Jazz Messengers. Went to the Grunwald Music School. Willie Humphrey was one of the teachers,
traditional jazz revivalist. Bob Barberin was his drum teacher, who was Paul Barberin's brother. Paul Barberin, of course, not only is a very well-known drummer, but he's the composer for Bourbon Street Parade. So he very quickly becomes the drummer for the Dave Bartholomew Big Band. This is just after he's been playing seriously for only a couple of 3 years, and they're the premier black band in post-war New Orleans. So very quickly he became an excellent drummer. And this band is playing in R&B clubs all over the city in the Southeast, probably as far west as Houston and as far east into the Florida Panhandle. And Earl thinks his first recording was actually with Dave Bartholomew's big band on a song called Country Boy. It was a minor hit for Bartholomew, made number 14 on the R&B chart in 1950, and it was recorded at J&M Studio on Rampart. Excuse me. And that's a picture of Earl and Cosmo Matassa, of course, the guy that ran J&M, but of course, much later in their life. He enjoyed playing in the Bartholomew Big Band, appreciated it, but he really thought of himself more as a jazzer and was more interested in that. And locally, he played, the bands mostly he played with were Harold Dejan, Bourbon Street and other places, and with a band called the Earl Williams Quintet. So some of the stuff he recorded with the Dave Bartholomew Band, there's a list of it here. I don't have to read the whole thing to you. One of the most interesting ones is a song called My Ding-a-Ling. Chuck Berry actually had a hit with that in 1972. It was a live recording he did, I think in London, and he claimed to have been the author of it. And clearly he was not, because Dave Bartholomew not only recorded it, he recorded it under the same name in 1951. And then as a producer and a session guy, he did essentially another version of it with the Bees in 1954. He called that one Toy Bell, but it's the same song. And because Bartholomew is the sort of the guy behind Fats Domino, it's his band playing on a lot of the early Fats Domino sessions. So he played on all these Fats Domino tunes that I've listed here. It's not all of them, but I've tried to pick out some of the more high profile ones, including the Fat Man, the very first hit that Fats Domino had, recorded in 1949, and I think hit the charts in 1950. Blue Monday, Walking to New Orleans. And the most iconic one is probably I'm Walking from 1957 that has this really, really distinct drum groove that starts it. And the drum wonks actually sat down and had a session with him one time to explain what he did and how he did it. And there's a video of it that I want to play for you. So before I do that, a little bit of orientation. So it's an interview and he's at a drum set and they're talking him through this, and then he plays the groove and demonstrates it. And there's a little trick that he uses for the drummers to understand what's going on. At one point, he takes his left hand and moves it to play on his thigh. So he's still playing the whole rhythm, but you can't hear the left hand, you only hear the right hand. And he does the same thing with the right hand on his thigh, so you only hear the left hand. And then at the end of the clip, there's a band that plays an instrumental version of part of the song, and I want you to look at some of the people in the band and see if there's any familiar faces. Okay, so I think I have to change my screen sharing for this. Sorry.
It starts out with a great bass drum figure. Yeah, the bass drum
Y'all can see
figure.
this?
Yeah,
That's good, Dave. We've lost audio right now.
yes.
So you've lost the audio completely.
Now I've got it. Now we've got it.
Starts the very first stroke is with the left. Yeah. So you play your back. You set up the half beat on the third beat. Those first two beats, the first beat and the second, the first beat with the left hand, the second beat with the right hand is actually the 2/8 notes. The third one is on the second beat, the 2/8 notes of the first beat, and the second beat is the after beat. Right. So that's the reason it starts on the first beat.
Dave, can you boost up the audio on that?
Let me see if I can. It's up all the way.
Okay.
That's great. You like that, Dan? Yeah, I like that. I think you got a hit there. I did. Which was my hit. Yeah, right.
I love that where he talking and says, I think you got a hit there, Dan. So the band, it was Alan Toussaint, clearly on playing piano. The bass player was Bill Huntington, who I think is now up in Arkansas. And I believe the tenor player was Red Tyler, who would have been one of the guys that was playing in the Bartholomew band with Earl Palmer. So it wasn't, so Fats Domino was a major performer he played with. And since Earl thought of himself as a jazzer, he had some interesting opinions on a lot of these people that he played with. Fats Domino, he said, if he was out playing with Bartholomew and Fats was on the bill, he never hung around to hear him because he thought he was just kind of a blues piano player, a boogie woogie piano player. And then my favorite quote about Fats Domino, these guys, this last one down here. Fats was one of the first people Dave Bartholomew signed for Imperial Records. We all thought, that's nice. He can play pretty good. Maybe he'll make a little money. Fats Domino wasn't the only significant person. Professor Longhair, classic 1953 session for Atlantic Records, and it's the one that produced Tipatina. So the song that the club is named for was one that Earl Palmer played on. And then I also love this quote too about Professor Longhair. You know, we revere Professor Longhair. Earl says, I never really thought of him as anything special. People got caught up in the excitement and never heard all of the bad notes. Also did some Shirley and Lee sessions, and he had a real negative opinion of them. Particularly thought Shirley always sang sharp. And there's one line in here that's great. When Shirley sang, you felt around to see if he was cut. That girl sang sharp. And you can kind of hear that on this one.
So Earl said he couldn't figure out how they had any hits at all. But of course, the reason is they had a band backing them up in the studio that was some of the best musicians in New Orleans. And it's not just performers like this. He played on a lot of classic stuff by everybody. Lottie Miss Claudie, one of Lloyd Price's hits, the only one that was recorded here at J&M. Fats Domino's a piano player. And there's some stuff that really is not associated with New Orleans. Check out this one. Classic Merry Christmas Baby by Charles Brown. And this one, check this one out and see if this sounds familiar to anybody. If anybody are local radio junkies, this one should be familiar. You can take a guess and put it in the chat room. So there's all this classic stuff that he's doing in New Orleans, but the one that was the most significant was the stuff he did with Little Richard. Started with the session with Tutti Frutti in 1955, and then essentially all the Little Richard hits were recorded at Cosmos Studios, J&M, and then over on Governor Nichols. And so Earl played on every single hit of Little Richard's that you know of. I think that's him in the photo with Little Richard. I'm not 100% sure because he didn't tour with him, so it would be odd for him to be in a band picture, but he's been identified as that in the photo, and it looks like him. So, and even Earl recognized at the time, particularly playing on Tutti Frutti, that once he started playing with Little Richard, there was a whole thing that changed for him in terms of the music. And this is what drove his personal change and drove major changes in rock and roll. And the phenomena that happened is what we call straightening out the eighth notes. So for you to understand the significance of this, I got to get a little bit down in the weeds. So I'm going to ask your indulgence to follow me on staying along with this and understanding some music. So in music, popular music, there's a pulse. Some people will call it a beat, but it's a steady pulse. It's usually counted in cycles of 4. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so on. But music contains more notes than the pulse. In particular, there are a lot of notes that are played between the pulse or the beat. And there's a lot of ways that you can fill in those notes. One of them is triplets. And they call it a triplet because you take the one beat and you turn it into 3 notes. So it sounds like this. Da, 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 da. And a common way of counting it is 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. And that should be very familiar to New Orleans music fans because that characterizes a lot of the Fats Domino stuff. Walking to New Orleans is a classic example. You'll hear the guitarist start on the recording playing the pulse. And then when Fats Domino starts singing, he fills in the triplet with the piano. So check that out. So that's a fairly clean example, but it's all over his music, a lot of that stuff. Well, you don't have to play all of the triplet when you play the music. You can play only what they call a partial triplet or just the let beat. So it sounds like trip, let trip, let trip, sorry, 1, let 2, let 3, let 4, let 1, let 2, instead of
1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1, let 2, let 3, let 4. And that produces what's called, it's kind of a clippy-cloppy feel, and it produces a shuffle or a swing beat. That was significant because that characterized most of rhythm and blues coming out of World War II. And rhythm and blues was the feedstock for rock and roll. Essentially, you layered some country and western flavoring on top of rhythm and blues and did some other things, and you evolved into rock and roll. Louis Jordan was the most high-profile rhythm and blues player post-war, and so this shuffle rhythm or swing rhythm is all over his music. Caledonia is a classic example. You can hear that fairly distinctly, I think, on the piano. So it's dun 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 dun. That's what rhythm and blues and rock and roll sounded like going into the 50s and through most of the 50s. That's not what it sounds like now. That's not the only way you can subdivide the pulse. You can make it more uniform. That's why they're called straight eighth notes. So instead of dun 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 dun, you can go da 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 da. So it's the same number of notes, but there's a whole different feel to it. And that is what happened to rock and roll. If you turn on the radio now and listen to anything that's pop influenced or rock influenced, it's all straight time. So a classic example of that, since Rolling Stones are considered the greatest rock and roll band in the world, their iconic song is Gimme Shelter. And you can hear that rhythm very distinctly on that. The guitar opens up with straight time, and then you'll hear a scratcher comes in. That's that percussion instrument that goes. You'll hear that rhythm very, very distinctly on that. All right, so you're going from shuffle and swing into straight time from the 40s, 50s into the 60s. How does that happen? Well, the musicians are figuring it out, both on the bandstand and in the recordings. And so what's happening is some of them change the rhythms that they're playing and others don't. And so in the 50s, you get this mishmash of rhythms on a lot of the stuff that's classic rock and roll. And frankly, if you were trying to do that today, people would describe that as wrong. You're not supposed to play these rhythms against each other, but a lot of classic rock and roll is characterized by that, and it just sounds awesome. A classic example would be Chuck Berry. A lot of his stuff, he played straight time on guitar. He had a frequent piano player by the name of Johnny Johnson that played behind him. And he would play triplets, he would play the shuffle rhythm, he'd play straight time, he's all over the place. And this back in the USA is a good example because you can also hear the drummer who's more or less swinging behind Chuck Berry. Particularly when Chuck Berry starts singing, it's really interesting. Johnny Johnson is straight time. He's doing shuffles. He's all over the place. Even Elvis stuff on Jailhouse Rock. Once the band starts playing, you can hear the drummers. Well, the drummer actually tries playing a little bit of straight time and then just fails. And he starts swinging behind a band that is actually trying to play straight time.
So technically, some of these things are just, they're mistakes, but
They sounded good, so they're now classics. So what was Earl Palmer's role in helping this happen? Well, it basically started with Tutti Frutti. He does this session with Little Richard, and Earl's a swing drummer. And he comes into this session and he's trying to play swing behind Tutti Frutti. And Little Richard has this right hand where you hear this ding, 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 way up on the high end. He's doing straight eighth notes. And Earl, he himself has said, I played that session wrong, but he paid attention. And then he started changing what he did. And you can hear the transition from Tutti Frutti to a song called The Monkey Speaks His Mind. This is there were actually two versions of that, 1957 that he played on. This is a Dave Bartholomew recording. And then Bartholomew did a later one in 1964. So in Tutti Frutti, Little Richard's playing these straight notes and Earl is swinging behind him. And you get to The Monkey Speaks His Mind in 1957, Earl's the one who's playing straight time and the rest of the band is trying to swing. So listen to Tutti Frutti and listen for that piano. So now in Monkey Speaks His Mind, Earl distinctly plays straight time. So he's essentially trying to drive this new rhythm through the band and through the session. And you can hear it most clearly on his hi-hat. That's the closed cymbal thing that has a sound. And you'll hear the rest of the band is swinging, but you'll hear it mostly manifest. There's a little triplet phrase at the end of the measure that repeats over and over. You'll hear da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum.
Discussing things as they are said to be. Said one to the other. Now listen, you two. There's a certain rumor that can't be true.
So if Earl Palmer did nothing else in his career, this up to this period would be enough of a reason to remember him. Very, very significant influence, not only in terms of the body of work he did, but how he helped to redefine how rock and roll was played. But in 1957, he just starts another chapter. He moves out to Los Angeles. It's a couple of things motivated him. One was that he was a big fish in a small pond. He was the premier session drummer here in New Orleans, but he had gone as far as he could. So he was looking to expand his opportunities. And he also was having a hard time with the Jim Crow era here. In particular, he had started to develop a relationship with a white woman that he subsequently married. And he knew trying to do that in New Orleans in the 1950s was just impossible. So that was part of his motivation to move to the West Coast. And the specific trigger was he got hired as an A&R man by Aladdin Records in February. And an A&R man is sort of what we would now think of as a producer, although their responsibilities could be much more extensive. They would find the talent, they would hire the musicians, they would arrange the session. In Earl's case, he actually played on the sessions. And pretty quickly, he became part of what was known as the Wrecking Crew. And this was a loose aggregate of maybe 25 to 30 musicians who wound up playing from the late 50s into the 60s, wound up playing on most of the pop and rock recordings that came out. So one of the more high profile people that was a part of the Wrecking Crew was Glenn Campbell. Of course, he subsequently became a high profile musician, had his own TV show. When he came out to Los Angeles, Earl talks about him sleeping, Glenn Campbell sleeping on Earl's floor when he got there. And the other high profile drummer was Hal Blaine. So that's Hal Blaine in the back of the picture on the right with Glenn Campbell in the front. And this wrecking crew is ubiquitous. Just to give you an example, I pulled out a compilation the other day of hits by the Fifth Dimension. So they were a band from that period that did a bunch of Flora Nero songs, and they did Age of Aquarius. So these are hits that are recorded over a number of years. And when I looked at the personnel, 11 songs on that disc, there was one drummer on every one of them, and it was Hal Blaine. So he was basically the guy playing a lot of these hits at that time, the other drummer besides Earl. And Hal probably had more of a presence on the pop and the rock stuff that you heard on the radio, because that was kind of a niche. That was really what he was good at. And in the middle of the 60s, every drummer you heard on the radio either was Hal Blaine or somebody that was trying to sound like Hal Blaine because the producer told him to do that. Well, Earl was still part of the Wrecking Crew and did a lot of these sessions, but he also was broader in terms of the styles of music he could play. Basically, Earl could play anything. And it's best summed up by a bass player that was in the Wrecking Crew called Carol Kay. She played Fender bass, which is an electric bass as compared to the upright bass, that big acoustic thing that's the same thing the symphony players play. And for probably going into the 50s, the bass was an upright bass. And then Fender produced this electric bass that was meant for guitarists to double. And Carol Kay was one of a bunch of guitarists out there in Los Angeles, and she quickly figured out, if I specialize in the Fender bass, I'll work a lot more. And it worked for her. And she said Earl took over. I thought that he was the greatest drummer that I'd ever heard. And so he starts doing all this session work. And these are some of the people that he worked with. Sam Cooke, from 57 to 1964, recorded a bunch of classics, including this one. Brothers, Soul and Inspiration, Unchained Melody, You've Lost That Love and Feeling. Bobby V, Take Good Care of My Baby, The Night Has 1,000 Eyes. Jan and Dean, The Little Old Lady from Pasadena.
It's the little old lady from Pasadena. The little old lady from Pasadena. Ready, go, has a pretty little flower.
Richie Valens, he plays on both the Richie Valens hits. So if you kind of take it year by year, 1957 is the first year he's out there. He's working as an A&R man. His first hit is this song by Thurston Harris, Little Bitty Pretty One, which he arranged and played on. And this is awesome. This song swings like crazy.
I'm walking
Yes, indeed, I'm talking for you and me, and I'm hoping that you come back to me.
So the guy that plays on the original version, they have him available to play for Ricky Nelson, and that's Earl and Ricky Nelson there in the photograph. 58 and 59, he does a couple of novelty tunes, The Purple People Eater and Kooky Kooky Lend Me Your Comb. Y'all remember that? 77 Sunset Strip. Willie and the Hand Jive, that is Earl. So 1960, you have Alley Oop by Dante and the Evergreens. You have a Walter Brennan song. Y'all remember Walter Brennan? He was on that old TV show called The Real McCoys, but he's in all these old movies, To Have and Have Not, in these John Wayne Westerns. He was not a singer, but they were trying to get him a pop career, I guess. 61, some of the notable stuff were 2 songs recorded by this band that was called Bee Bumble and the Stingers. They were essentially rock versions of classical tunes. Bumble Boogie was Flight of the Bumblebees, and Nutcracker, of course, was Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. 62, the first hit by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, The Lonely Bull. So when Herb Alpert starts playing this music, he calls the band the Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. There is no Tijuana Brass. It does not exist. It did not exist. It was the Wrecking Crew that was playing on these records. 63, Deep Purple, you got an Andy Williams song. 64 was a classic year. 65, he dips into the Beach Boys stuff with Please Let Me Wonder, Supreme song, A Lover's Concerto. 66, River Deep Mountain High. This was a Phil Spector session that was supposed to be the epic song for Ike and Tina Turner, and it just went nowhere. So after 66, his session work for records falls off some. It's not necessarily because his demand changed, but he starts to migrate into other things like film and television. Although there are three other projects I want to highlight before we leave that. 1969, he records with Screamin' Jay Hawkins on Constipation Blues. This is every 14-year-old boy's favorite song because it is literally a song about a guy sitting on the toilet trying to go to the bathroom. And then he's the primary drummer on the third Bonnie Raitt album called Taking My Time from 1973. She had a really productive period through her first 4 albums, Bonnie Raitt, Give It Up, Taking My Time, and then Streetlights, and then kind of went into a fallow period, lost her recording contract, and then, as we all know, had a resurgence, and everybody knows Bonnie Raitt now. But this album, Taking My Time, all 4 of them are good, but Taking My Time has some just classic performances on it. There's Guilty, a Randy Newman song, Everybody's Crying Mercy, Mose Allison, Cry Like a Rainstorm, which is an Eric Kaz song. He's the same guy that wrote Love Has No Pride, which a lot of female singers of that period did. Earl's quote from that session is, telling you it's a shame I don't remember any of those Bonnie sessions. So this guy's the primary drummer on this classic album, and he doesn't even remember doing the sessions. It's because he's working so much. He has a morning session, an afternoon session, and an evening session. So he's got 2 drum sets. He's got a drum tech that he hires when he gets done with the morning session. The drum tech has already set up his second drum set for the afternoon session. And then the drum tech breaks down his drum set from the morning session and brings it to the evening session. So it'll be set up when Earl shows up. And there's also a re-recording of an Elvin Jones drum solo. he was in this really trippy movie called Zachariah from 1971. It was a Western that could only come from that period. They cast a bunch of musicians in it, and they cast Elvin Jones as a gunslinger. Well, Elvin Jones is a jazz drummer. He's most known for playing in John Coltrane's quartet. And they would sometimes play these epic duets on the bandstand. It's him and John Coltrane just playing for 15 minutes, just the two of them, not the rest of the band. And he was known for playing a lot out of time. It's not that he didn't know where time was, but he'd play ahead of the beat, behind the beat, and particularly in his solos. So his solos are basically not reproducible. And when I say not reproducible, it's not just somebody else couldn't play them, he couldn't play them again. If you said, Elvin, we really like that, we need you to play that over again, he couldn't do it. Well, he has a drum solo in this Zachariah movie, and the audio was bad. They did not get it recorded. They got the film, but they didn't get the audio. So the contractor said, no problem, we can re-record that. And the drummer on the session is Earl. So the contractor goes to Earl, and Earl tells him, you're nuts, I'm not doing this. Nobody can do this. And then he thinks about it, has second thoughts, and says, you know what, give me the film. He watches the film for 2 hours, transcribes what he thinks is going on, and comes back and dubs the solo over Elvin Jones. So you can watch that video. I think this band on stage is James Gang, by the way, but I'm not sure. So I love it. If you have the fortitude to go see this movie or find it someplace and watch it, you think you're hearing this great Elvin Jones drum solo, and it's actually Earl Palmer. All right, so a major reason the radio hits dropped off for Earl is because he migrated into doing film and television work. And that was a pretty big deal because he essentially was breaking the color barrier when he did it. It was mostly, up to that time, exclusively had been white drummers doing it. And Paul Humphrey, who was a later drummer who came by, followed in Earl's shoes, said Earl was the first Black drummer to break into the higher class work, the Sinatra dates and the films and TV. And he was actually the first Black contractor on a network TV show. So this is just kind of a quick list of some of the films he played on from 1961 to 1987. And I didn't even include them all. I just tried to pick out some of the titles that might be more familiar to people. And he's also doing TV work, 57 to 83. I love it. You see the one in the middle? The Flintstones. And he does some later recording. There's some interesting projects. In 1993, there was an album. They put together a bunch of New Orleans legends to record an album of new stuff and old stuff. Alan Toussaint, Dr. John, Red Tyler, Lee Allen, Edward Frank. And Red Tyler, Lee Allen, and Edward Frank would have actually been guys he played with in Bartholomew's band. They called the album Crescent City Gold. Nah, it's not, I don't think that the album is all that interesting. I think it's probably a good example of when you get legends together, you don't always get legendary music. The song on the album that features Earl the most is this one called New York Buzz.
And this is the bear.
And
Not a whole lot of
so
change.
Just a shine.
the whole situation changes, the environment for playing. What happens starting in the 60s is a lot of bands are coming in and they want to play on their own records. And they have the ability to do that. So that wasn't a big deal in terms of his business because it kind of coincided with the migration into film and TV. But then a next generation later, you get electronics. And so you're even replacing a lot of all the musicians with electronics. Essentially, somebody can come in and score a movie or a TV show just using a keyboard and electronic gizmos. And so the market for what he was doing really fell off quite a bit. He did get a lot of recognition though. People really understood his contribution. 2000, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's the picture on the right. And Modern Drummer is probably the premier drum magazine for drummers, both amateur and professional. And he was featured on the cover multiple times. And some of the people that worked with him or other people that knew of him. So Max Weinberg, who was the E Street Band drummer and Conan O'Brien's band leader, he really cited Earl's dancing. He said that when he played his feet, it was like he was dancing on the pedals. And Lalo Schifrin was a guy who hired Earl a lot for the movie work. And he said, I always started my jazz symphony orchestras with Earl. And so Lalo Schifrin did a lot of stuff, but what people might know him for would be Mission Impossible, that iconic 5/4 theme song. He died in 2008. He's buried out in California, Riverside National Cemetery. I actually did see Earl play once. He'd come back to New Orleans and he'd play at Jazz Fest and Ponderosa Stomp. And of all the places I got to see him was at Jeff Fest. If y'all remember, Jeff Fest used to be out in Lafreniere Park. It was kind of like a mini jazz fest. It was actually pretty good. And I think he was playing, I know he was doing a jazz set, and I think he was playing with a jazz quartet at that time. If you're interested in checking out some other related stuff, the primary biography on Earl is this Backbeat by Tony Sherman. So part of it is Tony writing, and part of it is transcription of interviews that he did with Earl. I think he's got like 190 hours of interview material with Earl. There actually is a movie about the Wrecking Crew. Earl's not featured very prominently in that, although he is in it. And it gives you a sense of really what that environment is like out there. There's a New Orleans drumming video that has a bunch of iconic New Orleans drummers on it. Earl is one of them. There's a series called Roots of Rock Drumming that includes written material and DVD on bunch of drummers. So it's not exclusively Earl, but he's in that. And then there's some albums. Drumsville is a variety of his recordings, a couple under his own name, but then some of the other hits. Another one he did called Percolator Twist. And Mitch Woods, who's a sometime New Orleans piano player, did an album called Big Easy Boogie, where he got as many of the Dave Bartholomew alumni together as he could, and he recorded an entire album. And there's actually a really interesting video of a session of Counting the Days, one of the songs on that, where Dave Bartholomew is doing a head arrangement, laying out an arrangement, singing an arrangement to the horn players in the session. And that's pretty cool to watch. You can find that online on YouTube. So that's the story of Earl Palmer. I don't know if people want to ask any questions. I tried to come in under an hour, but it just barely. But if there's anything in the chat that people want to talk about.
Yeah, Dave, let's see if we've got anybody that has any questions. We did have Shelly Palmer, who was Earl's daughter, said that I think there was a question you asked about a song, and she said it was Ron Montrell.
No, it was not. It's a good guess. But it was Roy Montrell, and what he did was, when I hear that mellow saxophone, Rockin' at Cosmos was actually, I think it was Lee Allen was listed as the lead on that, and it's pretty familiar because it's a theme song for one of the rhythm and blues shows that's on WWOZ on one of the weeknights. I think it's Wednesday night, but I can't remember for sure.
I actually got it right. It was Roy Montel.
Yeah,
So
it
he
said
was.
Roy yeah, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, Roy Montel. Yeah, so she said. So if we have anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat. Someone else mentioned the Wrecking Crew movie. I actually saw it at the Britannia a couple of years ago, so it's about a couple of years old. And I think one of the children of one of the studio session, one of the Wrecking Crew members is the director and the writer of the film too. So.
Can I just
say anything? Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say something. Hal Blaine was pretty much the guy behind calling them the Wrecking Crew. But if you ask Carol Kay, the guys, they used to be called the Clique.
That's how Earl referred to him. He always called him the Clique.
Exactly. So, but for history's sake, the Wrecking Crew will suffice. But yeah, that was a great presentation. Thank you, Dave.
Thank
Dave,
you.
Did he work
the
with
Wrecking Crew-
Harold Baptiste in Los Angeles?
He was in Los Angeles during that period. He was a fairly prominent arranger and very active. Of course, he has that whole stint with Sonny and Cher, but he wasn't really a part of the Wrecking Crew. There was a kind of this New Orleans mafia out there that would work, but he really was not part of the core of what was.
No. Did Earl work with Harold? That's what the question is.
Oh, did Earl work with Harold? I don't know. I know they crossed paths and he liked Harold, but I don't know if he did any sessions with him. That's a good question. I don't know. Any other questions?
Looks like everyone's just very happy that they got to hear all this, and we're blown away by how much information you gave and how much that we did not know as New Orleanians and fans of New Orleans music all over the place.
I do have a bonus round if people want to hang out for brain teasers.
Sure.
1964, he recorded 2 songs, Please Let Me Love You and It Won't Be Wrong, by a folk rock group. They called themselves the Beefeaters. They followed with a string of hits through the 60s and 70s, but under a different name. So I want to know what the name of that band was that they changed it to. And so you can put it in the chat if you want to go on record. The
Carpenters?
No.
First guess? All right.
They had a association, or they had success with some Dylan tunes. And a primary member of the band at that time apparently was going under the name of Jim or James McGuinn. So that might be a giveaway.
Mamas and the Papas?
No, we would know him more as Roger McGuinn, and the band became the Byrds.
There we go.
Okay, we got another one. All of the session musicians acknowledged that one type or genre of music was uniquely difficult to play in its complexities. So I want to know what that was.
Good question.
And so most of you would know it from your childhood viewing, not your adult experience, although it's actually pretty good for adults too. I mean, I still like some of this stuff as an adult.
Cartoons.
Exactly, specifically Looney Tunes cartoons. Those apparently were the most challenging scores, and it drove the musicians crazy because the tempos are changing, the time signatures changing all over the place. So now we all have to go back and watch these Looney Tunes cartoons now, right? All right, got one more that's tangential. So it's not really Earl, but we talked about Gimme Shelter, and I always liked trying to make the point that Bernie Cato wasn't much wrong when he said all music came from New Orleans. Gimme Shelter, I played you a little bit of that. Rolling Stone magazine says it's the best of the top 100 songs recorded by the Rolling Stones, and it's characterized by this voice on the refrain. This really chilling, high-keening voice. Rape! Murder! And it's just haunting. So I want to know the name of that singer, and I want to know in what city she was born.
First guess was Darlene Love.
No, that's a good one. She was featured in 20 Feet from Stardom. So if you saw that movie, which was essentially about backup singers, and they actually took her back to this studio and talked to her about this session and filmed that. And the person is Mary Clayton. And of course, she was from New Orleans. But she moved when she was 9, but really, come on, it was in her blood, right? The reason her name is Mary is because she was born on December 24th.
Oh, okay.
All right, so thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Dave, for giving a great presentation and providing this information. This was really, I mean, unbelievable amount of songs that Earl Palmer played on. I mean, just an incredible career. And we're glad we get to say he came from New Orleans. So thank you all for coming tonight. We will be sending a video out. So if you wanted to share it with your friends, you're welcome to share it afterwards. And our next one right now is on the books for February 23rd, talking about the Aaron Burr conspiracy. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Dave.